Have you ever wondered how much money a teenager actually needs to break out of the system everyone calls the Matrix? Not the movie kind, but the everyday loop of school, bills, pressure, and waiting until life finally starts. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't get financially free because they never know the real number they're chasing. Today, we're not talking about getting rich. We're talking about escape velocity, the amount of money that gives you options, control, and time. And the crazy part? For teens, that number is way smaller than you think, but also harder than it looks. In the next few minutes, we'll break down math, psychology, and stories of those who started with almost nothing and completely changed everything. By the end, you'll see money completely differently and maybe even question what free really means. Let's start with something most teens never hear. Financial freedom is not about millions in the bank. It's about how much money you need so you are no longer forced to do things you don't want just to survive. That number is different for everyone, but there's a surprising pattern behind it. Think about a typical teenager's life. School takes most of the day, maybe a part-time job on weekends, and then expenses start creeping in. Phone, food, transport, small impulse buys that feel harmless but stack up fast. Now here's where it gets interesting. Studies on spending behavior, like those referenced in behavioral economics books, such as Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, show that humans drastically underestimate their monthly micro expenses. For teens, that often lands somewhere between $200 and $600 a month, depending on lifestyle and location. So let's imagine a teen who wants to escape the matrix, not by quitting life, but by creating freedom. The first version of financial freedom is simple. Cover your basic monthly costs without relying on parents or a job you hate. If that number is, say, $500 per month, then the math becomes your first reality check. Here's the formula used in financial independence research, popularized by the 4% rule from the Trinity study. You need roughly 25 times your yearly expenses invested to live off returns safely. So $500 a month equals $6,000 a year. Multiply that by 25 and you get $150,000. That's the freedom number for basic survival independence, not billionaire status, just breathing room. Now, pause for a second, because this is where most people mentally exit the conversation. They hear $150,000 and think it's impossible. But let's slow it down. This number is not meant for a teen to magically have. It's a target horizon, a direction, a mental map, because financial freedom starts long before the money arrives. It starts when you understand the system you're playing in. And here's a funny reality check. Most teens think they need more money than they actually do, but also spend it in ways that don't build anything. It's like trying to fill a bucket with holes in it while arguing the ocean isn't enough. But there's another layer most people miss. Your freedom number can shrink dramatically if you change your lifestyle structure. For example, if housing costs are shared, or if you learn skills that allow remote income, suddenly your monthly needs might drop from $500 to $300. That changes everything. Now your target is not $150,000 anymore. It's closer to $90,000. This is where financial freedom stops being fantasy and becomes design. You're not just chasing money, you're engineering your life like a system. And once you see it that way, the matrix doesn't look like a prison anymore. It looks like a puzzle, and you've just found the first hidden rule. But here's the part nobody talks about. Even knowing your number doesn't free you yet, because the real challenge isn't the math. It's what happens to your habits once you start chasing it. Now here's where things get interesting, and honestly, a little uncomfortable, because once a teen understands the freedom number, the next question hits hard. How do you actually get there without burning out, quitting school, or waiting 40 years? Let's talk about the real engine behind financial freedom: income streams. Not just one, multiple. And no, you don't need to become some social media genius overnight, but you do need to understand something. Research from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics quietly confirms most people don't get rich from their main job alone. They build wealth through side income, assets, or skills that scale. Imagine two teens. First, one works a basic weekend job, earns money, spends it, repeats. Second one also works, but instead of just spending, they ask a different question. How can I turn this into something that pays me again without me being there? That one question changes everything. Let's make it real. A teen starts by editing short videos for small creators. First month, maybe €100. Nothing crazy. But then they improve, learn faster than most adults, and within a few months they're charging €20 per video. Suddenly, money, they're not trading hours randomly. They're building a skill asset. That's exactly how digital economies work today. And here's the twist most people miss. Financial freedom for teens is less about capital and more about leverage. Leverage means using tools, skills, or systems that multiply your effort. A book like The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco explains this clearly. Wealth comes from scale, not slow saving alone. Now picture another scenario. A teen starts a simple online store selling phone accessories. At first, it's messy. One sale feels like a victory, but then they learn something crucial. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, or Etsy can act like free distribution engines. One viral post can do what 100 hours of work never could. That's leverage again. Attention working while you sleep. But let's not romanticize it. Most attempts fail early, not because the idea is bad, but because consistency is brutal. There's a reason behavioral studies from Stanford show that people drastically overestimate what they can do in a week and underestimate what they can do in a year. Teens especially quit right before things start compounding. And compounding is the hidden boss fight here. Not just money compounding, but skill compounding. The first month you're slow, the third month you're decent. By month 6, people start paying you without hesitation. And by month 12, you look back and wonder why it ever felt hard. But there's a psychological trap here too. The moment a teen earns their first real money online, something strange happens. They feel rich temporarily. And that feeling can destroy momentum faster than failure ever could. Because financial freedom isn't about spikes. It's about systems that survive your moods. So the real shift is this. Stop thinking like someone trying to make money once and start thinking like someone building something that can't unlearn how to earn. That's the bridge between surviving and escaping the loop. And just when it starts to make sense, there's still one question left that changes everything completely. Even if you build income and understand your freedom number, what actually stops most teens from ever reaching it? Now we hit the real final boss of financial freedom for teens. And it's not math, it's psychology. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most teens don't fail because they can't earn money. They fail because they can't survive themselves long enough for money to grow. And that's a completely different problem. Let me explain. There's a famous concept in psychology called delayed gratification, proven in the Stanford marshmallow experiment. Kids were given a choice, 1 marshmallow now or 2 later. The ones who waited tended to have better life outcomes years later, not because they were smarter, but because they could resist short-term temptation for long-term gain. That's literally the hidden skill behind financial freedom. Now imagine this in real life. A teen starts making money online. First 50 euros, then 200 euros. Suddenly there's a temptation. New headphones, new clothes, maybe a game skin that feels urgent. And there's nothing wrong with buying things, but the problem is when consumption grows faster than income. That's how the matrix loop tightens again, quietly. And social media doesn't help. Every scroll is basically a highlight reel of people spending money you don't have yet. Research in behavioral science shows that constant exposure to curated lifestyles increases impulsive spending by distorting your perception of normal life. In simple words, you start thinking broke is temporary and rich is normal, but only for everyone else. Here's a story. A 17-year-old starts freelancing, earns steadily for the first time, and for a while it's exciting. But then he does something different. He delays upgrading his lifestyle for 6 months. Same phone, same setup. Instead, he reinvests everything into learning better skills and tools. 6 months later, his income triples. Not because he worked harder, but because he didn't reset his progress every time he got paid. That's the real secret nobody posts on Instagram. Financial freedom isn't about making money fast. It's about not restarting the game every week. And this connects back to your freedom number from earlier. Even if it's $90,000 or $150,000, the biggest barrier isn't reaching it. It's staying on the path long enough for compounding to do its job. Albert Einstein allegedly called compounding the 8th wonder of the world, not because it's complicated, but because it rewards patience so aggressively. But here's the twist. Discipline alone isn't enough, because if your goal feels too far, your brain will sabotage you. That's why most successful young entrepreneurs don't focus on the end number. They focus on weekly systems. One new client, one new skill, one small improvement. It's almost boring, but it works like gravity. And then something strange happens after a while. Money stops feeling emotional. It becomes mechanical, predictable, less like chasing freedom, and more like building a machine that slowly frees you without asking permission. So if you zoom out, the answer to how much money does a teen need to become financially free starts to shift. It's not just $150,000 or $90,000. It's the point where your skills, habits, and income systems become strong enough that life stops being reactive. And once you reach that stage, something funny happens. You realize the matrix was never a wall. It was just a pattern. And patterns can be rewritten. So let's bring this all together, because the real answer to how much money does a teen need to become financially free is both simpler and more powerful than most people expect. It's not a magic number. It's a moving target shaped by your lifestyle, your skills, and how well you understand the game you're in. For some teens, financial freedom might start around $90,000 invested with low expenses. For others, it might feel closer to $150,000 or more. But the number itself was never the point. The point was always control. Control over your time, your choices, and your direction. Because once you understand the 4% rule, the idea of leverage, and the power of compounding habits, money stops being just money. It becomes a tool that reflects how you live, not something that defines who you are. And that's the shift most people never make. If there's one thing to remember, it's this: you don't arrive at financial freedom one day. You build it in invisible layers: skills, discipline, patience, and systems that slowly remove dependence from your life. And maybe the biggest surprise of all, the earlier you start, the smaller the matrix actually becomes.